Okay, now, one thing you're going to figure out, pretty blunt, pretty real. So, I'm saying that because this is probably not going to be the most fun set of notes. You might be thinking that no notes are fun. They are for me, not so much right here. So I am doing the functional group, and your page is actually 2 half pages. So I cut this part off. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave this little white part at the bottom because there's one that I want to add. And I'm going to go ahead and I guess just pull this one off there. And here's what I think I would do. I think that I would glue each one of these on the left and leave all of this on the right so that you can add in pieces. Here's what the deal is. So one of the most difficult courses when you go to college is organic chemistry. A lot of times, honestly, it's a weed out course. It's for people if they can't manage to do organic, you can't go to med school. If you can't manage to do organic, you're not going to grad school. But it is difficult, and it has to do with just carbon-based chemistry. And when you put a functional group on a carbon-based molecule, the functional group determines the properties of the molecule. So these functional groups, you know, it's kind of the same thing. Like if I go out and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, I'm out on the road and there's this thing with 2 wheels and I don't know, there's a guy and it's got handlebars, and if it's out in the road, you're going to think it's probably a motorcycle. It could be a bike, but it's probably a motorcycle. So if I start to describe to you like that the molecule has an amine group, it's going to behave a certain way. And it's going to really belong to a certain class of molecules usually. So we're going to talk about these, and I just think I'm going to leave all this space over here. It's not going to hurt me. Worst case scenario, I have blank page. Okay? So I'm going to just do one at a time. And that way I don't have to feel like that, you know, I've got to squish stuff. I'm not even saying that this is set up in the best way, but you do need to know functional groups. You do need to be able to recognize what they are. Hopefully you've seen them in chemistry and you remember them, and sometimes like trying to remember, I don't think the names are different, but biology, sometimes we do call things a little different. So let's just start. So let's number them so we have some sense about where we are in the work. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is an amine group. Sometimes it's also called amino. So the formula is, and this just goes to show here, what I'm going to put is, it's known for being NH2. So you want to always remember that depending on where it is on the molecule, it can be written the other way around too. So it could be H2N. The reason why an amine group is an amine group is because of the nitrogen that's there. This is in its non-ionized form, but it's often found in an ionized form, which means in this case it's picked up a hydrogen. So this is the general formula. I'll show you over here in the example. So names of compounds that have amino groups, amine, you will see things that are called amines. They're called amino. Both of those words associated with something let you know that you have this NH2 group. So for the examples, sometimes these are going to be like awful to draw. Not many, but they can be. So if you remember when you were watching some of the other videos, this NH2 is going to be attached covalently to something. It's just, it varies. This is the group that gets attached to something. So we said that when we don't really want to like pin down an exact example, we can say this group varies. So this is just the rest of the molecule. any molecule, when it has an NH2 attached to it, so this amine group falls, and it's going to have the behavior that we're going to write over here in just a second. So the example would be, this is the rest of the molecule, and you're looking for an NH2 attached. If it's in the ionized form, you're still going to have the N, but instead of having NH2, you're going to have NH3. So you're going to have an ammonium, but it still falls into and is considered to be just the ionized form of an amine group. And so you gained a hydrogen here. So let's come over here and put that. So this is the one that's not ionized, NH2. This one, NH3, so that would be NH3 plus, or it could be written backwards, H3N, and you'd have the plus. A lot of times it's here, it doesn't matter. So it depends on which side of the molecule it's drawn on, whether it's drawn, but you always have to have this covalent bond with the N. That's why it's written backwards, because they're showing you this bond is with the end, and then you've got 3 hydrogens attached to the end, to the N. Okay, so let's see what kinds of properties you get if you have an amine group. You become polar, so this is going to now be a polar molecule. So having that functional group makes the molecule polar. If it's polar, by default, it's going to be soluble in water. And because it's going to be able to accept this hydrogen, it's going to, so it acts as, okay, I wish I maybe had stayed on that one other page, a weak base. And the reason is because it can accept a proton, and a proton is another name for a hydrogen ion. Okay, so I'm going to just show myself that now that's all about amine. Second group, I told you, most fun thing we've ever done. Sulfhydryl. It's a sulfur and a hydrogen, so it's going to look like this, the covalent bond with the sulfur, or it could be written backwards, depends on what side of the molecule that it's on. Sulfhydryl groups, any molecule that has this SH, you could call a thiol. So they're called thiols. And I'm going to go ahead, I know you're not going to want me to, but I'm going to draw an example of a really important amino acid that has a sulfhydryl group. And so this is preemptive because you don't know how amino acids are structured, but I'm still going to teach it to you and walk you through it. Amino acids have almost like this just one variable spot. Everything else is cookie cutter the same. They all have a central carbon. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. They, on one side, they have an amine group. So I would put the N bonded to the carbon and the H's. Directly across from the amine group is a group we haven't learned about yet. It's carboxyl, and that's a COOH. So it's going to be a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and then a hydroxyl group. Then they have, at this third position, because you know carbon's got 4 positions, so directly across from each other you have a carboxyl group directly across from an amine group. In fact, that's how we call the way that the whole molecule with a bunch of amino acids, we talk about the carboxyl end and the amine end. And then the hydrogens above, and then there's this one position here, the 4th position for the carbon bond, that varies. And so for an example of a sulfhydryl group, you would put the variable group that's going to be this sulfhydryl. So this right here is what's going to make this amino acid become called a thiol. And it's going to have a very unique behavior because of this sulfhydryl group. Now the name of this amino acid is called cysteine. And so that's an example of a molecule with a sulfhydryl group. And now let's put what actually you get as a result of having this SH group. It's going to, this SH group, this functional group SH, is going to stabilize the structure of proteins. And what happens is when there's in a group of long chain of amino acids, so a polymer of these, if you have two cysteines close enough to each other, they'll form a loop, a hairpin kind of loop, and they bond with each other and form a disulfide bridge. So that's what it's called. And it just gives stability to that molecule. Okay, we've done two. Phosphate group. So these are the ways that you could see, that's what the formula part is for. Let me do mine, not being a 12-year-old girl. Pretty sure I still like that. So for a phosphate group, in general, it's going to be a phosphate fully oxidized. So that's going to be with oxygen, so it's PO3H2, or it can be the hydrogens can dissociate, so it can lose the hydrogens. Now, at this point, we don't go crazy too much, but if you've just dissociated two positives, you're now going to have an overall negative that's going to be part of it. Now, a lot of this dissociation, like right through here, where you gained a hydrogen with the amine, and you formed the ammonium, but you gained it, or here where you lose it, that's going to be in water. It tends to happen when these are in water. So this is what a phosphate group looks like. There's no name for molecules that have it. And so what does it look like when we don't just write it all out? Like, where are the bonds? What do the bonds look like? Well, we've got the rest of the molecule. There's the rest of the molecule. And between the phosphate group and the rest of the molecule, you're going to have an oxygen, and then your phosphate. Then you're going to have a double bond with the phosphate with another oxygen, and you're going to have hydroxyl groups that are off. So that's PO3, because this oxygen does not count. This is the actual group right here, PO3H2. And it's going to go back and forth in solution with losing the hydrogens. So you're going to have, here's the rest of the molecule. Again, there's this linkage through an oxygen. It's not part of the phosphate group. And you're going to have the phosphate piece that's left plus the dissociated hydrogens. So these then, because they lost their hydrogens, they're going to have a negative charge. So phosphate groups are going to overall make a molecule have a negative charge. So let's come over here now that I've got room. So when the hydrogen ions dissociate, so they dissociate, that's going to equal the phosphate group has a negative charge. That becomes really important with ATP, It becomes important with DNA because they have a phosphate piece of their backbone. So it's going to make the whole molecule, so then let's put here equals, the whole molecule is negative. So that being the case, as soon as I mention that there's a charge involved, then you're going to have something that's polar. So it's going to, anything polar, I'm going to put therefore, is going to be soluble in water. And it's going to behaves as an acid. And it's because it can lose the hydrogen ions. So because it can lose hydrogen ions. Because if you add hydrogen ions to a solution, you make something more acidic. Alright, 3 of them, which you think we're done. But we saved this piece down here at the bottom for a reason, because we need to add a group that we didn't have. So for 4, we're going to write about a methyl group. So a methyl group is just a hydrocarbon, the smallest hydrocarbon, CH3. So remember, it could be H3C, either way. So I didn't do that here. I guess I could do that. So it'd be H2O3P, just to be sure we remember that, either side of the molecule. All of a sudden, this is different. Like, there's no name for this. Methyl groups are really, really important. When you add those to a molecule, they're the equivalent of almost shutting them down because of the way that it works. So an example of this would just be whatever the molecule is, the rest of the molecule, it varies. Anything that I'm going to attach the methyl group to. So there's my methyl group. Now, I had, I guess you can't see it. I had an amino acid down here. I'm not going to do that as an example. This is fine. So, this is now going to give certain properties that are predictable when you do a methyl group. It's the first time we've said it, but methyl groups are non-polar. They do not play nice with water. So they are not soluble in water. So when you add a methyl group, you make it a point in the molecule, like right here, to where that molecule now is going to have a non-polar piece. And non-polar pieces avoid water. So most of the time they dive into the middle of the molecule, which is going to basically be the same thing as closing that part of the molecule off. So what that would do is it's going to convey or give the molecule it's attached to hydrophobic properties, which means does not play nice with water. Okay? That's a for real thing. Like, we finished that now. Okay. Put the other one on here. I'm so super proud of you hanging in here with me. I've been a fan of glue sticks, but I'm really liking it for this right here. Okay. So, we're back to doing the same thing we were doing. So, with this is 5. Okay. So, I'm on my 5th one. Hydroxyl super important. So it's an OH group, so it would be the covalent bonds with the O, with the oxygen. So it's an O or a HO is what one of my students said, and I thought, I'm going to take that not in a way I think you mean it. I'm going to just take that you're reading. So anything that has an OH group added to it, you can call an alcohol. So your example here would be just what we did. So there's no reason to draw this big old molecule that I've got here, although I'm going to draw a big one for down here. So you would have your the rest of the molecule. It could be huge. Look at mine. Like, it could be huge. That's just a sugar alcohol. But the rest of the molecule, the covalent bonds with the oxygen, and then you have your hydrogen. Or it could go the other way. Okay? So what does it do? When you add a hydroxyl group, because, I mean, think about it. Hydroxyl group and a hydrogen make water. So this is overall going to be that oxygen electronegative, partial negative piece that you would still have. It's going to be polar. I'm going to be smarter this time and not write in the little fold. So that, therefore, soluble in water. So whatever you add that to, even if it's a long hydrocarbon and you put this on there, it becomes where it has a polar piece. And so that part would be soluble in water. So these two, actually, a hydroxyl plus a carbonyl, if they had a baby, it would be called carboxyl. So this is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen. So let's write it the other way, because it's going to be the covalent bond's going to be with the carbon. And there's two ways of naming things. Depends on where this piece is in the actual molecule. So that's why we're going to draw actual pretty big ones. So you would have either the suffix that would be -one or -hide. So it's either one of those. So let's do acetone first. So I'm going to draw acetone. If you've ever had your nails done, you know what acetone is, right? So the way acetone is it has 3 central carbons. This middle carbon has the carbonyl group. The rest of the molecule is just a hydrocarbon, which means it's made up of carbons and hydrogens. So if you think about it, this central carbon has 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds already taken care of. Nothing's going to go here. This carbon has 1, so it has 3 more that it can make. So that's a methyl group. And right here would be another methyl group. So this part of the molecule is going to be nonpolar, and then you added that in the middle. So if it's in the inside, so where am I going to put this? Right here. So if your carbonyl is in the interior, location of the actual molecule, then you're going to use ONE, acetone. Another one, very similar if you think about it, you're going to have 3 carbons, and this time the carbonyl is on an exterior carbon. So this carbon has 1, 2, 3, so it has the potential for yet another hydrogen, and then we're going to have hydroxyl groups, and then the rest will be hydrogens. And the name of this molecule, and we talk about it a lot, is glyceraldehyde. So carbonyl in the middle, carbonyl on the outside, hide. So this is going to be one of the exterior carbons, and it's going to be hide. Whoops. Carboxyl, hydroxyl, carbonyl had a baby. So you will see it written this way. The covalent bond with the carbon, so it's COOH. That's a carboxyl group. It has the ability to be an acid and lose this hydrogen into the solution. So it can be written in an ionized form, where it's lost that hydrogen, or you can actually show spatially where it is. So you could have the rest of the molecule, it's going to be covalently bound always to the carbon, and then we said carbonyl and hydroxyl had a baby. So the carbonyl would be the double bond with the oxygen, and then the hydroxyl would be the OH group. So COOH. And so that's different. People get it confused. They come over here and they're like, oh man, look there. Oh, no. CO, where's your other O? So this right here would not be. This is what it has to show. To one carbon, double bonded oxygen and a hydroxyl group. And what you're going to get is the molecule that it's attached to now has the properties of being polar. So we're going to keep going. So therefore soluble in water. And like I said, it's going to act, so it acts like an acid because it can donate a hydrogen, a proton. Okay. So we filled our formulas in. We really have not written anything about what a functional group is. So we need to do that. You could do it down here, but I'm going to give it its own page because it's important. That's why we did all of that. So put over here what functional groups are. Functional means the function of the molecule is determined by the functional group. Functional groups are going to determine the unique chemical properties and we want to be specific. It's of carbon-based molecules. So, of organic molecules. Now, literally, that is organic, except a whole year's worth. So you get into all kinds of things that whatever carbon can bond to. Because carbon itself isn't going to actually determine the properties of the molecule it's in. It just has a bunch of spots. Like it's got 4 slots, and it's like, bring it on. What's going to be our function? Well, if you put a methyl group, the molecule has a nonpolar part. So why are these important? What's the big deal? Why do we care? So this would be the explain. So if I said explain functional groups, first of all, I'm going to tell you what they are. They're going to be small parts or additions to a molecule that determine the unique chemistry of it. And why do we care? Well, for one, is they're really going to greatly diversify what life and living molecules can do in the way they act. So they contribute to the diversity of life. It's kind of like, people. If you think about it, if we were all the same, yuck. We want to be different, and that diversity is what makes everything work. So where do you find them? You find them, they say frequently bonded because they want to be careful, but they're going to be bonded covalently, let's put that in there, bonded to the carbon skeleton. And we're just repeating ourselves. This is going to be redundant because carbon means organic, but the carbon skeleton of organic molecules. Now, the reason why that they call them organic is because when they first identified these carbon-based molecules, they thought only living things could make them. Like they could not be synthesized outside of a living thing. So they called them organic. And then somebody, I don't know, 1700 something anyway, he was able to make urea in the lab. And it was like, oh, wait. Okay, well, you can make them outside of a living thing. But now what we do is we just say carbon is the basis, like all life is carbon-based. And so that's why we call them organic. So what else is important? They're predictable. I keep using that word. If y'all watch Princess Bride, and you know what I'm talking about, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. If you have not seen Princess Bride, that's your assignment. You have to go watch it. So they have predictable, so that I'm going to say specific, chemical and physical properties. So every single time that you put a methyl group on a molecule, it's going to be nonpolar. They are, these functional groups, they are the place where the molecule is reactive. So the functional group is the region, I like that word, of the entire molecule that are chemically reactive. So that, pay attention to those. That's where the stuff's happening. And we said this already, but I guess it's important again. So no matter what molecule that they're put on, so this variable group obviously varies, that's what's called that. So no matter what this is, hydroxyls act the same, period. Doesn't matter who it's attached to. Attached to something big, something small, doesn't matter. That part of the molecule will behave the same. So it behaves consistently, predictably, from one molecule to another. Doesn't matter what it's attached to. Good deal? But you're fun. You're the best. So I will put this with pictures and all of that up, and off we go. Because guess what? That is all of chapter 4. And next we move into 5, which are macromolecules. So we're moving right along.
Right now, head on over to sciencemusicvideos.com where you can do the tutorial that I've written for you about functional groups. It'll really help you learn this material. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It's an unbelievably great value. And if you're part of a class that's not using Science Music Videos, please have your teacher contact me and I can talk to them about setting up a site license. See you at the next video.